Sandra was a beautiful woman in her late 20s. She had long black hair, a perfect smile, and a charm that could turn heads anywhere she went. People in her neighborhood often whispered about her. Some admired her looks, while others thought she was too focused on money and luxury. Sandra grew up in a modest home, but she always dreamed of living a life filled with expensive clothes, fancy cars, and trips to exotic places. For the past 2 years, she had been engaged to David, a hardworking man who owned a small car repair shop. David truly loved her. He worked long hours, saving money so they could have a nice wedding and a stable future together. He often imagined buying a house with her, maybe having children and growing old side by side. But to Sandra, David's love wasn't enough. She wanted more, much more. Things began to change when Sandra met Kareem, a wealthy Arab businessman visiting the city for a property investment. Kareem was in his 40s, tall, with a neatly trimmed beard and a wardrobe full of designer suits. He drove expensive cars and stayed in luxury hotels. Kareem noticed Sandra at a charity gala one evening. She was wearing a gold dress that shimmered under the lights, and he couldn't take his eyes off her. They talked for a while, and Kareem quickly learned she was engaged. But that didn't stop him from showing interest. Over the next few weeks, Kareem sent Sandra expensive gifts, gold bracelets, perfume from Paris, and even a new phone. He invited her to dine in high-end restaurants where meals cost more than David's monthly rent. Sandra loved the attention and the lifestyle Kareem offered. Compared to Kareem's wealth, David's steady but modest life felt boring to her. David began noticing changes in Sandra. She stopped answering his calls for hours, sometimes days. She seemed distracted when they were together, always checking her phone. The final blow came when David saw her stepping out of Kareem's black Bentley in front of her apartment building. She laughed at something Kareem said before leaning in to kiss him on the cheek. David stood frozen across the street, his heart pounding in his chest. That night, Sandra came to David's apartment. She didn't even try to explain much. "David, you're a good man," she began, avoiding his eyes. "But I've realized we want different things. I can't stay in a small life forever. I need more than you can give me." David sat in silence, his hands clenched into fists. He wanted to beg her to stay, but he could see her mind was already made up. Within a month, Sandra was engaged to Kareem, her social media filled with pictures of her, wearing diamond rings, riding in yachts, and posing in front of mansions. Friends and strangers congratulated her, calling her lucky. But behind all the glamour, Sandra had no idea what kind of world she was stepping into or how dangerous it would become. It was the last time David saw her alive. Sandra's wedding to Kareem was nothing short of a fairy tale. It was held in an extravagant hotel ballroom, decorated with golden drapes, crystal chandeliers, and white roses imported from Europe. Every table was covered in fine silk, with gold-rimmed plates and glasses sparkling under the lights. Guests wore designer clothes, and the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the sound of live violins. Sandra wore a gown that cost more than David's yearly income. The diamond tiara on her head glistened as she walked down the aisle. Kareem stood at the altar, dressed in a traditional white thobe and golden bisht, looking like royalty. When they exchanged vows, Sandra told herself she had made the right choice. She was marrying into wealth, status, and a life of luxury. After the wedding, Kareem told Sandra they would be living in his home country, a wealthy Gulf nation. Sandra was thrilled. The idea of living abroad in a mansion filled with servants felt like a dream. She quickly packed her belongings and posted farewell pictures online, showing her boarding a private jet beside Kareem. The first few days in Kareem's country were like a fantasy. She was taken to a massive villa with marble floors, golden curtains, and fountains in the courtyard. Every morning, a maid brought her breakfast in bed, fresh fruits, pastries, and imported coffee. Kareem showered her with gifts, silk dresses, diamond necklaces, and handbags from the most exclusive brands. But soon, Sandra began to notice small details she didn't understand. Kareem rarely let her go out alone. If she wanted to shop, a driver and a female chaperone followed her everywhere. Whenever male staff spoke to her, Kareem would get annoyed. He also reminded her often that in his country, women were expected to dress modestly and avoid drawing attention from other men. Sandra nodded and agreed, but she didn't feel comfortable. One evening, Kareem hosted a gathering with his friends. Men in traditional white robes, and women in black abayas. Sandra wore a sparkling blue gown, thinking it would impress everyone. But when she entered the room, she noticed a few disapproving glances from the women. Karim pulled her aside and whispered sharply in her ear, "You must respect our ways. This is not your country," he said, his tone firm. It was the first time he spoke to her with such coldness, and it sent a chill down her spine. As weeks passed, the fairy tale feeling began to fade. Karim became busier, often leaving her alone in the villa for hours. Sometimes, when he came back, he seemed tense and irritable. He started questioning her about every call she made, every place she went. Once, when she tried to go to the market without telling him, he shouted at her and locked her in the bedroom for the rest of the day. Sandra told herself it was just part of adapting to a new culture, that it would get better. But deep down, she began to feel trapped, like the luxurious villa was a golden cage. Still, she stayed silent, convincing herself that the price of luxury was learning to obey. She didn't know yet that her silence would soon cost her more than her freedom. It would cost her life. It was a Thursday evening when Karim told Sandra they would be attending an important gathering. "It's for business," he said while buttoning his white thobe. "The sheik will be there. Make sure you look elegant but modest." Sandra nodded and carefully chose a black silk abaya embroidered with gold patterns. She wrapped a matching scarf over her hair, leaving just enough of her face visible to feel beautiful. Inside, she missed the freedom to dress how she wanted. But she didn't want to upset Karim again. They drove to a large palace-like estate, guarded by tall gates and security men in dark uniforms. The air smelled of burning incense, and the marble driveway shimmered under the lights. Inside, the gathering was grand. Men and women were separated into different sections. Men sat in a large hall, while the women gathered in a richly decorated lounge filled with golden cushions, patterned carpets, and low tables covered with fruit, dates, and tea. Sandra sat quietly among the women. They spoke in Arabic, occasionally glancing at her and whispering. She didn't understand most of what they said, but she could feel their curiosity. Some smiled politely, while others barely acknowledged her. She sipped her tea, wishing she had someone to talk to. After about an hour, a young woman in her early 20s approached her. She introduced herself as Aisha, the niece of the sheik. Aisha spoke fluent English and was warm and friendly. She told Sandra about the traditions, the expectations, and the unspoken rules of the household. "People here notice everything," Aisha said softly. "Be careful who you trust." Later in the evening, Karim came to check on Sandra. His eyes scanned the room before he leaned toward her ear. "We'll leave soon. The sheik's son wants to meet you," he said, his voice low. Sandra followed Karim to a private room where a tall man in a dark robe stood by the window. His face was half in shadow, but his smile was unsettling. Karim introduced him as Faisal, the sheik's eldest son. Faisal's handshake was firm, and his eyes lingered on Sandra a little too long. She felt a strange discomfort. But Karim didn't seem to notice, or maybe he didn't care. Faisal spoke politely at first, asking about her life in the city and her family. But as the conversation went on, his questions became more personal and his gaze more intense. Sandra tried to keep her responses short, hoping Karim would end the meeting quickly. Finally, Karim excused them, saying they had another appointment. On the way back to the villa, Karim was unusually quiet. When Sandra asked if something was wrong, he simply said, "Faisal likes you. That could be useful one day." She didn't like the way he said it, as if she were a piece of property to be traded. That night, Sandra lay awake in bed, replaying Faisal's stare in her mind. She didn't know why, but it made her uneasy, like something bad was waiting just beyond the horizon. She was right. That night was the beginning of a chain of events that would lead her straight into danger. 2 weeks after the party, Sandra was lounging in the villa's courtyard when Karim entered with a folded envelope in his hand. He looked pleased, almost too pleased. "This came from the sheik's household," he said, placing the envelope on the table in front of her. "It's an invitation." Sandra picked it up and saw that it was written in Arabic with a short English note at the bottom. "The sheik's family requests the pleasure of your company for an exclusive dinner. The date was set for the coming Friday night. They don't invite just anyone," Karim continued. "You should feel honored." Sandra forced a smile, but inside, her chest felt heavy. She remembered Faisal's eyes on her at the last gathering. The way his stare had lingered too long. She wondered if he would be there, and deep down, she already knew the answer. Over the next few days, Kareem seemed more controlling than usual. He told her exactly what to wear, how to greet people, and even how much perfume to use. You must impress them, he kept repeating. When she tried to ask why it was so important, his tone sharpened. Just do as I say. Friday evening arrived. Sandra dressed in a deep green silk gown and a matching headscarf. The gown was modest but elegant, with golden embroidery along the sleeves. Kareem looked her over from head to toe, nodding in approval before they left. The sheik's estate was even more dazzling at night. Rows of palm trees lined the driveway, lit from below by golden spotlights. Inside, servants in crisp uniforms moved silently, carrying trays of silverware and crystal glasses. The women were once again in a separate lounge, but this time, Aisha wasn't there. Sandra sat alone, sipping tea and trying to ignore the curious glances of the other women. After about half an hour, a female servant approached her and spoke softly in Arabic. Sandra didn't understand, but the servant gestured for her to follow. She was led through a series of long, dimly lit corridors until they reached a door guarded by two men. The servant opened it, revealing a private sitting room. Faisal was inside, dressed in a black robe with gold trim. He smiled, his eyes sweeping over her in a way that made her want to leave immediately. Please sit, he said in smooth English. We don't often get guests from your country. Sandra sat on the edge of the sofa, keeping her hands in her lap. Faisal offered her a drink, which she declined. He began asking about her life again, her marriage, her time in his country, whether she was happy. The questions felt harmless at first, but his tone carried a strange weight, as if he were testing her. Then, without warning, Faisal leaned forward. You are very beautiful, Sandra. Kareem is a lucky man. But sometimes, luck is meant to be shared. Her heart skipped. I should go, she said, quickly, rising from her seat. But when she turned toward the door, she saw the two guards standing just outside, watching. Faisal smile deepened. You will see me again, he said quietly, sooner than you think. That night, Sandra lay awake in bed, her mind racing. She didn't tell Kareem what happened, partly out of fear and partly because she didn't trust how he might react. She didn't know it yet, but the invitation had been more than just a dinner request. It had been the first step into a trap that was already closing around her. A month passed after the dinner, and life in the villa grew tense. Kareem had become even more possessive, monitoring Sandra's every move. Sometimes, she caught him on the phone speaking in Arabic with a low, serious tone, glancing at her between words. When she entered the room, he would end the call abruptly. One afternoon, Kareem told Sandra they would be attending another gathering at the sheik's estate. But this time, it was a private affair. His voice was calm, but there was a strange edge to it, like he was hiding something. Sandra hesitated. I don't want to go, she said quietly. Kareem's eyes hardened. It's not your choice. This is important. You will be there. On the day of the event, a black luxury car arrived at the villa. Instead of Kareem driving them, two men she didn't recognize were at the wheel. Kareem told her he would meet her later at the estate and that she should be on her best behavior. Sandra's instincts screamed that something was wrong, but she didn't dare argue. The car ride was silent, except for the faint hum of the engine. As they drove farther from the city, Sandra realized they weren't heading toward the sheik's estate at all. The streets became emptier, the buildings sparser. Finally, they pulled up to a large, walled property with high gates. One of the men spoke briefly to a guard before the gates opened. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of burning oud. The driver led her into a lavish but strangely quiet house. No other guests were there, only guards and a few servants who avoided her gaze. Sandra's heartbeat quickened. In a grand sitting room, Faisal appeared. He was dressed casually this time, but his smile was the same unsettling curve she remembered. Welcome, Sandra, he said. We have much to discuss. I think there's been a mistake, she said, taking a step back. Kareem told me. Kareem knows you are here, Faisal interrupted. In fact, he sent you. Her stomach dropped. Why would he? Faisal's eyes gleamed. You'll understand soon. He offered her a drink again. She refused, but he simply shrugged and sat back, studying her like a predator watching its prey. Then, without warning, he motioned to the guards. Take her upstairs. Sandra tried to resist, but the guard's grip was like steel. They led her to a locked room on the upper floor. The windows were covered with heavy curtains, and the door shut with a deep click. The walls seemed to close in on her. Hours passed. At some point, Faisal entered the room. There was no more small talk, no polite questions. The conversation turned dark, and Sandra's worst fears came true. She realized too late that this was no misunderstanding. She had been delivered, here like an offering. When it was over, she was left alone, shaken, and terrified. Her mind raced with one thought: I have to get out of here. But the guards never left their post outside her door. The trap was complete. There would be no easy escape. Sandra woke the next morning to the sound of heavy footsteps in the hallway. Her body ached. Her mind felt clouded, but fear kept her alert. She sat on the bed, listening. The voices outside were muffled, speaking quickly in Arabic. She recognized one of them. It was Faisal. The door opened, and he stepped inside. Behind him stood two guards, both holding themselves with cold detachment. Faisal looked calm, almost too calm, as if what was about to happen was just another business matter. You've caused complications, he said in English, his tone low but sharp. Karim is worried you will talk. That cannot happen. Sandra's stomach twisted. I won't say anything. Please, just let me go. I'll leave the country, I swear. Faisal shook his head slowly. You were never meant to stay here long. Karim knew this from the start. He was paid well. The words hit her like a physical blow. The man she had left everything for, the man she believed loved her, had traded her away. Her vision blurred with tears, but anger pushed through her fear. You're lying, she whispered. Faisal smirked. No. Karim has another wife now. You were entertainment. He gestured to the guards, who stepped forward. Sandra backed up until her shoulders hit the wall. No. Please, she cried, her voice breaking. One guard held her arms while the other produced a length of silk cord. The fabric was soft against her skin, almost mocking the violence it carried. She kicked, screamed, begged, but the room swallowed her cries. Faisal watched in silence as the cord tightened around her neck. Her hands clawed desperately at the silk, her lungs burning for air. The world around her grew dim, her body weakening. The last thing she saw was Faisal's expression, calm, unfeeling, as if her life meant nothing. When her body went limp, the guards lowered her to the floor. Faisal stood over her for a moment, then gave a small nod. Make it look respectable. We don't want trouble. They wrapped her body in a clean white sheet, the kind used for honored guests, and carried her out of the room. Sandra's mind was gone, but the house was filled with the silent weight of what had been done. Outside, the desert night was cold and still. The guards loaded her into the back of a black SUV. No one in the nearby homes would ever know what had happened within those walls. By morning, Sandra's body was gone, disappeared into the vast emptiness of the desert. No funeral, no goodbye. Her name would be whispered only in shadows. A warning to others who thought they could escape the power of men like Faisal. Her dream of luxury had ended not in wealth, but in silence. Back in Sandra's home country, her sudden disappearance didn't go unnoticed. Friends began to worry when her usually active social media went silent. Days passed without a single post, message, or call. David, her former fiancé, heard the rumors from a mutual friend who said, someone saw a post that she's missing in the Middle East. At first, David didn't want to get involved. After all, she had left him for Karim, but something inside him couldn't let it go. David contacted Sandra's cousin, who confirmed she hadn't been heard from in over 2 weeks. Her husband says she's traveling. The cousin explained, but no one believes him. That was enough for David to alert the police, who quickly passed the matter to the foreign ministry. Sandra's case became a diplomatic request, and soon, the authorities in Karim's country were pressured to provide answers. Karim, however, claimed ignorance. He told investigators that Sandra had run away while visiting a friend and that he had no idea where she was. But his story kept changing. First she had run away, then she had left for another country. Then he claimed she had asked for a divorce and vanished. These contradictions raised suspicions. A breakthrough came when a young servant from the sheikh's household anonymously contacted an international human rights group. She claimed she had seen Sandra at Faisal's private residence shortly before she vanished. The servant described guards escorting Sandra upstairs and never seeing her come out again. She also recalled hearing a loud thud one night and whispers about removing the problem. This testimony was passed to local authorities. But the case was delicate. Faisal was the sheik's son, a man with untouchable influence. Investigators faced constant roadblocks, missing security footage, erased phone records, and witnesses who suddenly couldn't remember anything. David, refusing to give up, spoke to journalists. Soon, Sandra's story made headlines. Bride disappears after marrying wealthy Arab businessman. The coverage sparked outrage online, and international women's rights groups demanded justice. Faced with public pressure, the authorities in Karim's country reluctantly opened a formal inquiry. Forensics teams were sent to search a remote stretch of desert after a tip suggested burial activity there. Weeks later, skeletal remains wrapped in a white sheet were discovered beneath the sand. DNA testing confirmed what David and Sandra's family already feared. It was her. The investigation linked the burial site to vehicles belonging to the sheik's household, but no arrests were made. The official report listed the cause of death as undetermined, and the case was quietly closed. Karim returned to his life of luxury, and Faisal remained untouchable. Back home, Sandra's family held a small memorial service. There was no body to bury, just an empty coffin and a framed photograph of her smiling in happier days. David attended, standing silently in the back, his hands clenched. He thought about the life she had chosen, the dangers she had ignored, and the cruel way it had ended. Sandra's story became a cautionary tale, whispered among women who dreamed of riches abroad. Sometimes, the golden life hides the darkest traps, and in the silence of that desert, her voice was lost forever.